Anyway, we have a new book.
Yeah.
It's The Fall by Albert Camus, and I had never read this book before.
You finished it already?
No, I haven't finished it yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, but I'm fairly well into it at this point. It's not that long.
No. And our audience, I can tell you, I want you to catch up with us. In this case, I feel it's really important that you catch up with us. This is a major work of 20th century, philosophical and literary thought, and it's short, and you can listen to it because it's in the form of a monologue by a guy sitting in a bar. So I think it's very appropriate that you might listen to it rather than read it if that's your style. And finally, it costs 99 cents if you want to get it on Apple Books or something like that. So you got no excuses, and we can have a great conversation because this is one of the most subtle and I think mysterious works of literature at this level that you will ever encounter.
Definitely. I had never read it. And he's obviously he's known for other books. Mm-hmm. His name came up a lot at the beginning of the pandemic, obviously because of the plague. Yeah. But this book is fascinating at this moment. Well, Walter, do you want to just give a little summary briefly, right. or even like an introduction to it? Because when I started reading it at first, I was like, yeah, I don't know. And then very quickly it turned into something that felt like it was speaking. It was similar to the C.S. Lewis thing, where suddenly I felt like, wow, this is speaking directly to right. something that's going on right now. So walk us through what this book is about.
First of all, who is Albert Camus? Just briefly. You have to know because his work and his life are so entwined. He was a most notably resistor to the Nazi occupation of France, and he published newspapers almost every day at the risk of his life. At the risk of his life, if he was found out during the occupation of Paris and France. He's a hero of speech at a level that I don't think we can even touch in America because we haven't been occupied by a foreign power. I mean, if I was down there every day publishing columns that were hostile to an occupying army, then I might have a right to even, breathe in the same room as Camus, but I don't. Anyway, after that, he, as a young literary star, and he wasn't that old, he'd written The Stranger, which was and he's called an existentialist, and he'd written The Plague, which sort of was about the valiant action that is doomed, but we must perform despite that, over and over, the kind of Pyrrhic victories that we win every day only to face defeat, but can't give up.
Yeah, it's kind of a flip side of absurdism thing that
right.
It's not my favorite. It's absurdism, but it's not my favorite view on absurdism. Like, right. My favorite view on absurdism is life is ridiculous, but it's awesome anyway. And his is sort of more, it's pointless, but let's do it anyway.
Right.
It's a different kind of absurdism for me. But
you're gonna lose.
Yeah.
You're gonna lose. You're gonna exhaust yourself in the service of a bunch of principles that really don't exist in any transcendent way. And you got to do it just to be, I don't know, tough. Now, Camus dressed like Humphrey Bogart on purpose. He loved the aesthetic of American film noir. You'll see him with the galois and the overcoat. He was a tough guy. He was a former soccer player. He was partly Moroccan. He came from a country that France oppressed as a colonial power. And he also stood up for them as he stood up for France against the Nazi occupation. Anyway, his last book in 1956, his last novel was The Fall. And it takes this form. There's a man in a bar in Amsterdam on a cold autumn night, and it takes place in the fall, which is one of the reasons I chose it. It's a double meaning. The fall of man and
The Fall.
and The Fall. Yes.
Yeah, it's sort of like The Importance of Being Earnest.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
And there's this mystery man sitting at a bar called Mexico City in Amsterdam on a foggy night, and a stranger sits down to him, and this book takes the form of a series of monologues that he gives to this stranger who never speaks for himself. Okay, we don't know who his audience for these series of monologues is, and he's a very cultivated man, and he's a former lawyer from Paris, and he lives now in the Jewish quarter. This is a big part of it in Amsterdam, where he says our Hitlerian brethren sure did a cleanup job.
Yeah,
there.
the vacuum cleaning line, but I'll find it. But go ahead. Mm-hmm.
So it's situated in the shadow of the Holocaust. And there's a very sardonic, self-hating, but also grandiose quality to this speech. It's a very complicated tone. And what the tone really is, finally, is a question that I think we'll have to answer in a future. Is he bitter? Is he self-loathing? Is he self-pitying? Is he in fact still grandiose in that he's kind of like the ancient mariner, just insisting that this person listen to him? And the story he tells is really just that of a bourgeois lawyer who he's a big liberal. That's also the important thing to understand.
Yep.
A big liberal. He loves helping old ladies across the street, blind people. He'll look around when he was back in Paris and see a blind person trying to come across the street and run up. He is a virtue signaler par excellence. And the subtitle of this book could be Confessions of a Virtue Signaler.
Absolutely, and it should be that. There's a line that perfectly describes what you're talking about. I revealed myself to be both a tireless dancer and an unobtrusively learned man. I managed to love simultaneously, and this is not easy, women and justice. So in other words, he's a virtue signaler. He's for all the right things, but he manages to be like a womanizer anyway.
Well, and Matt, you sent me. What's the great line that you sent me? What will be the epitaph of 20th century man?
Hang on a second, I'll find it. It's about fornicating, but keep going though.
He read the newspapers and he fornicated.
He read the newspapers and that's right.
So it's about being addicted to the news too, and basically,
it always seemed to me that our fellow citizens had two passions: ideas and fornication. But anyway,
right? Yeah, exactly. And is that not still true? What do they use the internet for? News and porn,
right?
But anyway, he's this. He also was a pro bono lawyer. He said I had a special weakness for noble cases, but he's also a cad. And those are the two most salient elements of his personality. He loved and discarded women. He played them off against each other. And if any of you need a kind of sinful reason to read this book, let me give you something. I used to know in Malibu an author who was famous for his name was Neil Strauss. He wrote for Rolling Stone at one time for his books called The Game, which are the pickup artist books.
Oh, right, yeah,
And he said the most condensed and lapidary version of the pickup artist philosophy is in The Fall. A couple of paragraphs. He said, I needn't have written all those books because it's all in The Fall. And he named a page for me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Which one?
Pickup artists wanting to save money, you're going to get to a part in The Fall, or about halfway, 2/3 of the way through, where the entire secret of seduction is going to be. And Camus in real life was an epic seducer.
Yeah, it seems like that's a part of his French personality that he likes to accentuate.
His wife committed suicide over it.
Really?
Yeah.
Ooh. Okay. I didn't know that.
They lived back then pretty intense lives, and this is the record of one.
Well, I guess that gets to the other question about what this book is about, because again, having not read all the way through, the setup is he's in a bar, oddly enough, called Mexico City in Amsterdam, which he compares sort of a hellscape, like a labyrinth hellscape, because of all the canal systems and everything. And he's describing how he used to have this amazing life as a well-known French lawyer, where everybody revered him and loved him and thought of him as a virtuous beacon of rectitude and everything. But somehow he's ended up at the end of his life, essentially in like the red light district of Amsterdam, babbling to some unknown person. And that's the other fall in this book. He has fallen somehow, right? Well, why did he fall, right? Like what happened to him? And I don't know, because I'm not that far into the book yet, but it feels like he is going to move and describe a progression of his personality from this grandiose narcissist who is sort of harmlessly narcissistic, if one can say that, into something much darker. And that's my guess. That's where it feels like it's going. But it's about a kind of intellectual pomposity gone wrong.
Well, that, yes, but also a pose of public virtue versus private behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And not to, this isn't a spoiler, the story that he wants to tell, and it's only about 100 pages long, rather quickly becomes the story of one night in his life. We're about, just as Catch-22 is this huge novel that circles the incident in this inside this plane. This circles one night when he was walking home alone, and he had a choice to make. And for all his public, he's AOC on the, on the outside. He's Gavin Newsom on the outside. He's a man. He's a dashing, seducing man of virtue on the outside. But one night, when nobody was watching, he had a decision to make.
Okay. All right.
And so in that
moment. All right.
And in that sense, it also speaks to the Holocaust and to World War II, because it has to do with the difference between appearances. I mean, the Nazis too were very, especially the officials, very cultured people. And Hannah Arendt, the chronicler of the Nuremberg trials and the philosopher who came up with the words banality of evil, would have found this book interesting and relevant too. And I'm sure she did. I mean, they were part of the same circles. This is Jean-Paul Sartre, Albert Camus, Hannah Arendt, all these philosophers. And this is in the wake of the Nuremberg trials. So in the wake of the Nuremberg trials, if you're a liberal, and especially if you stood up to the Nazis in the French resistance, you have a right to think of yourself as pretty special. You won. You came out on top. You preserved civilization. All those awful people who killed those Jews, all the awful people who invaded those little countries and, subjected them to horror. So in other words, Albert Camus and this liberal lawyer should be at the very peak of their prestige in terms of guardians of civilization. But we're going to find this guy has a secret.
Well, I was going to say, isn't the next order question, though, after Nuremberg, like, how does this happen? Right? Like,
and he explains how it happens.
That's where it feels like it's going to me, right? So there's all these signals, where he keeps telling you how good he is. There's a line in there, I was a real tornado. My heart was on my sleeve. You would have thought that justice slept with me every night, right? And he does this all the time. Like he keeps describing how virtuous he was in these very witty ways. Like I think in a way that's different from his other books. There's a lot of sort of punchy one-liner-y kind of writing in this, and he's mocking himself in this sort of steadily building way early on. But it feels like what it's going to be is this indictment of the veneer of civilization, and this idea that, because he talks incessantly about how he always occupied the lofty places, right? And he's always high up, and that's where he feels comfortable. But
and in the symbolism of the book, he's now living below sea level in Amsterdam, you know, in a city that has to have dikes to keep from flooding. But before, he always loved being atop a mountain, a ski hill, an office in a tall building. It is Confessions of a Virtue Signaler. And the reason I think it's so wonderful is that Camus was a real hero. He was a real hero. He stood up to the Nazis, as I said. He, won the Nobel Prize at a young age for these really sort of searing philosophical books about fighting the good fight in a world that doesn't care. But this is the book in which he is wise to himself. And
there's a kind of despair that I feel in it. I don't know that it's actually going to go that way, but I feel in the prose that he's moving us towards this conclusion that's sort of like, this is inevitable. You can't avoid this, right? And or I don't know, maybe I'm wrong.
Well, it's also a book that's part of an argument that he was having with Sartre. And what you need to know about Sartre was Sartre became a real strong Marxist who basically believed that the ends justify the means in an extreme way. I mean, he would have defended and probably did terrorism. He was obviously on the side of the, North Vietnamese and the, Viet Cong and the Vietnam War. He was as left gets, really, philosophically and in his life. And Camus and he basically, though they both were joining forces against the Nazis, had a falling out afterwards, because Camus came to believe that you could not justify present horrifying actions in the name of a future utopia that might never come. He was a moralist, whereas Sartre was almost a kind of like, he was a moralist too, but a kind of hardcore utilitarian who believed that almost anything was justified if you were making progress toward this just society.
Yeah, and maybe that's why I always had a negative reaction to Sartre books, but Camus feels like a very different kind of thinker to me. Sort of self-questioning, witty, full of feeling. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on early on in this book. This is not someone that who's a one-note thinker or anything like that. It even though it's a monologue, which is a very tough thing. I don't know. Have you ever written something like that where it's just one person?
So it's a monologue. It's kind of like Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground.
Yeah, or Diary of a Madman.
Diary of a Madman. And I'll just say it here. I have thought many times of trying to rewrite this novel in some way. With a new situation, a new kind of monologue, a new kind of character, because I've probably read this book 20 times. I'm just parading my obsession and indulging my obsession with it. I really want to see what it's like for people who haven't read it.
What fascinated you? But you can't tell me
yet, right? The mood and the complexity of the confession, because it is at the end a statement almost about all of us. It truly reaches universal proportions in my mind, though it starts with a very eccentric kind of confession, and it opens out, and it does it in such a short time, and it does it in the wake of such shattering world historical events of which Camus was a part, that it just seems like a diamond that was forged in this massive cyclotron of pressures and,
I was going to say, of stress
and stresses. And it's also so damn honest about men and women.
Oh, well, I haven't gotten to that yet, but yeah, that should be interesting. It's funny. You mentioned Notes from the Underground and Diary of a Madman. That's one of the reasons why in the first few pages of this, I'm obviously one of the biggest Gogol fans in the world, but I didn't love Diary of a Madman. I thought that format is, I think it's very difficult, right? Like the apostrophic style where, it's almost like like a second person kind of writing, very difficult. And it's too easy to be gimmicky. Like to create sort of an anti-hero who rambles and has quirky traits, but that's not what happens in this book. It very quickly, it's not like you're standing back and watching somebody talk like a crazy person talk to himself. It very quickly becomes something where he's talking to you, and he finds something to grab onto and with you in the audience. And I just find it really compelling early on, like that dialogue. It's just really interesting the way he wrote it, and the character is really fascinating.
And he poses a question very early on. There's a kind of brutal, grunting bartender who never talks, who the narrator compares to an ape. And he asks a question very early: have we progressed past the apes? Because at least they don't pretend to be something they aren't. We do. And what price have we paid for that? And in a way, have we become more brutal because of that posturing? Would it be better, perhaps, to just still be in the cave, knuckle dragging, than pretending to be virtuous while tens of thousands die, or millions? But you said that the prescript is from Lermontov, a Russian writer that you admire, who I'm not familiar with.
Yeah, there's a quote at the beginning from a book called A Hero of Our Time. Russian, it's Geroy Nashov Vremny. And it's one of those books that we talked about with duels. It's 5 short stories about this character, and Lermontov was a young writer who died at a young age of a duel, not unlike Pushkin, but just very, very passionate, alive short stories that are very affecting to young people, right? It's a book,
but also about someone kind of in despair, right?
Yes, who sort of can't escape the darkness around them. And the quote is in there. Some were dreadfully insulted, and quite seriously, to have held up as a model such an immoral character as a hero of our time. Others shrewdly noticed that the author had portrayed himself and his acquaintances. A hero of our time, gentlemen, is in fact a portrait, but not of an individual. It is the aggregate of the vices of our whole generation in their fullest expression. So this was a book about, that book was about one character who sort of inexorably moves towards self-destruction, and maybe that's what he's talking about with this monograph at the beginning. But I thought it was really interesting that he quoted Lermontov. I'd never seen anybody, like a Western writer, do that. So
and there's a concept that I want to put into people's heads. You hear it all the time if you study English or literature. But I don't know how familiar the public is with the Byronic hero.
Right. Yes. Exactly.
And now Lermontov's hero, I haven't read the book. I cheated. I read some cliff notes about it. It was considered a version of the Byronic hero.
Totally.
The Byronic hero is somebody like a little bit like John F. Kennedy if he'd had more doubts or something, or public doubts. Like they're handsome, they're brave publicly, they're crusading, but they're also sensualists who feel doomed and pluck the fruit for today, and take as much pleasure as they can in this in this tragic world, but they also inspire others while they're themselves in despair, and they kind of wear nice clothes.
Right. Yeah, they're stylish. Exactly. Yeah. So the Lermontov book is exactly that. It's 100% that. Another person, Eugene Onegin, the Pushkin verse novel, very similar character, except he's not inspiring. He's more of a cad than that character. But yeah, the definitely a Byronic hero. Does that is this character a Byronic hero though? I don't know.
I think we find out that
he's a fraud.
The reduced version that we're meeting in the bar might not be. But the guy who was swanning around Paris, seducing people and taking up noble pro bono cases, and speaking, at assemblies of virtuous people was.
Gotcha. Well, I can't wait to get into it. I mean, as Walter said, it's not that long of a book, so if you haven't gotten one, go grab it. It's easily found online too. So. The Fall by Albert Camus. And Walter, thanks for coming out. Thank you everybody for watching us today, and we will see you again later this week.
See you then.